Hey guys, what's crack-a-lackin'? Welcome back to another episode of the Next Man Up podcast. I'm your host, Bannon Crowley. I'm here with my co-host, Colin Martin. How are we doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. We'll talk about the NBA Finals today. We don't really have much else going on. As you guys have probably realized in the past few episodes, that's really the only thing that's going on in the sports world right now. But we'll get into game one and game two. We can take a deep dive into them like we promised last week. The episodes have been a little shorter, but it seems like you guys are enjoying them. Last episode did very good. We got some positive feedback from that one. So it seems like you guys like it, especially with the shorter episodes. It's easier kind of to digest. But once we get more going on, we'll have longer episodes too, just as a week by week basis. But with that being said, we can talk about these. As we record this, the Nuggets and the Heat are tied 1-1. So we'll start off. We can talk about game one, and then we can talk about game two, and then going forward in the series. So if you want to take it away, starting with game one, the Nuggets ended up winning by 11. So any takeaways that you had from game one?
Yeah, game one was kind of, more of the Denver Nuggets dominance we expected to see. Also, before we jump into this, sorry to the hockey fans. I want to acknowledge, the Stanley Cup is going on. Obviously, Vegas and Florida are having a fun matchup, but it's just not our expertise. We're not going to pretend like we're going to give you the insider info on that. But to stick with the NBA, because that's really what we're here to talk about, game one was impressive. I mean, obviously, seeing Jokic go out there, get a triple double, 27, 14, and 10. It's, getting a triple double in the finals is not something that we see very often at all. We're used to it with Jokic. It's something we finally understand that he does night to night, but it's just an incredible showing. And Jamal Murray was great. On the other side, I mean, Denver was able to hold Jimmy Butler to 13 points. That is not the playoff Jimmy we've been seeing this whole series. So, game one really highlighted Denver's ability to just go out there and be the better team. They played better defense. They were hitting their open shots. It was incredible. And even the Heat's role players. I mean, in game one, we saw Duncan Robinson get 3 points. We saw Caleb Martin get 3 points. Max Strus get 0 points. So game one is exactly what we expected to see from them. When it comes to like specific takeaways, I think it was just the Heat's inability to guard Jokic in the post, because even though Adebayo had a good game, Jokic just ran the team through himself and was getting easy buckets down low. While his role players were hitting big shots, KCP had a great game one. Jamal Murray had a great game one. He's not a role player by any means, but when you have Jokic on your team, everyone else kind of falls into their own role. And it was just an incredible showing of basketball, to be honest. The Heat were put in a position where they really had to show out game two. And, I want to hear your breakdown about game one a little more. But as we saw in game two, they came back firing.
Yeah, game one specifically, I remember watching it, and my Bam Adebayo not good at basketball propaganda seems like it's been backfiring on me a little bit. But before this, when I watched him play against the Celtics, I did not see a good basketball player. But he decided to come out, especially in game one, taking 25 shots, which is like I would never expect to see Bam Adebayo take that many shots, especially in a finals game. But he dropped 26 points, 13 rebounds, and 5 assists. I did not expect to see that coming from Bam Adebayo. And especially like you said, with all the role players, Caleb Martin getting 3 points, Max Strus with 0 points, Duncan Robinson with 3 points. The only one who was really good off the bench, Kyle Lowry, was good, but Haywood Highsmith, who didn't play in game two, what we saw from this team is, especially if you were a Heat fan, I wouldn't have been too nervous after that game, because the Heat have had plenty of these games too, especially going back to that Celtics series where their shooters didn't play very well. And then, next back and get it done. And they did. Their shooters played really well in game two overall. So from the other side, though, from the Nuggets perspective, obviously you like what you see playing Jokic 40 minutes, him getting a triple double, and Jamal Murray also getting 26. Huge key. Bruce Brown, 10 points off the bench. He has been, we've talked about him every single game. It seems like he has at least double digits off the bench every single game. And going into game two, if you were rooting for the Heat in this series, like I said, I don't think you'd be too disappointed. And then they get it done in game two. So now we're knotted at 1 overall. But going back to Miami, it's going to be very interesting. I guess we can move over a little bit towards game two. That game was, I thought it was kind of out of reach. The Nuggets were up by, I think, 10-ish for most of the first half overall. And then I forget exactly how much they were up going into the fourth quarter, but it was still probably around 8 to 10-ish, if I remember right. And then the Heat just came out in the fourth quarter, Duncan Robinson having a huge fourth quarter overall, and just highlighting the bench overall. I mean, Kyle Lowry going out there playing, Max Strus had a bounce back game, which we expected. But Gabe Vincent, the leading scorer, he is just, I mean, if you're the Heat, you need either him or Max Strus to have a huge game alongside Jimmy and Bam Adebayo. And he did, and that's how they won.
Yeah, and one thing in this series that's probably been the biggest, pull in Miami's favor is their three-point shooting. Even in game one, where we saw Caleb Martin, Duncan Robinson, Max Strus, these guys not perform, they still shot better from three than Denver. And that's kind of the big thing because Denver is not a bad three-point shooting team by any means. I mean, game two, they shot 39%. That is really good for a team's three-point percentage. But the Heat shot 48%. There's a point in the game where they were like 9 for 13 in team three-point shooting. And game one, Denver also shot a good percent. They won the game. They ended up shooting 29%. That's really not that bad. But Miami shoots 33%, and that's what keeps them in it. It's an interesting thing because I think Denver is a very good three-point shooting team, but Miami is probably this playoff run has been one of the best three-point shooting teams I've ever seen. It's ridiculous. And guys like Gabe Vincent, even Kyle Lowry off the bench, and then, the classic undrafted role players that they love to talk about, which includes Gabe Vincent, but more so Caleb Martin, Max Strus. I mean, they're not just, 3-and-D guys that are playing up. They are shooting tremendous from the three, and that has to be credited to the coaching. I mean, they are getting wide open shots against a Denver team who I think is one of the best coach teams in the NBA, if not the best. Eric Spoelstra is putting on a masterclass, and it's showing out. I also want to give credit to your guy Bam Adebayo because even in game two, where Jokic gets 41, all this stuff, doesn't seem like it would be his best defensive effort. I mean, Bam stepped up when it mattered. And that's really, in the finals, that's the only thing that counts. It doesn't really matter how the whole first three quarters of the game go. If you pull it out in the fourth, you won the game. It's the finals. That's all you need to do. And I was impressed. I also think the Heat made a smart decision not playing Cody Zeller as much. I like Cody Zeller. I actually really don't think he's that bad. I think he's been underrated for a while now. But Jokic feasts on Zeller every time he's in the game. And you just can't deny that. So, Denver, I still think it's the better team. I've been saying Denver in 6, Denver in 5, all this stuff. But what I saw from game 2 was a Heat team that really knew how to climb themselves back into it. They started off the game hot. Then it seemed like they had lost control, as you mentioned, until the fourth quarter. And they willed themselves back to a victory. That's not something an 8th seed should know how to do. And they've done it in every single series they've played. What says they can't do it against Denver? It's 1-1 now, going to Miami. It's not going to be easy for Denver, even if they are the better team on paper and Jokic just dropped 41. It's interesting. It's not set in stone like I think a lot of people were setting it out to be.
Yeah, and overall, Miami is outscoring opponents by 90 in the fourth quarter throughout the postseason. So if you let them stick around, if they're down by 10 or less going into the fourth quarter in any of the games for the rest of this series, it almost seems like they're guaranteed to come back at that point. Whether they win or lose, they've been able to come back, and they're a fourth quarter team. And even the slumps that they go through sometimes in the first few quarters, they come back and they absolutely dominate in the fourth quarter. Going home too, I mean, if Miami can take game 3, this series becomes very, very interesting. And it's only, I think, a 3-point spread going into this game. But like I said, if we go into the fourth quarter and Miami's down by 5 or somewhere around there, it's going to be very hard for Denver just because it seems like Miami, they always have someone who shows out in the fourth quarter. We know what Jimmy's going to do, but their 3-point shooters just seem like they can't miss in the fourth quarter overall. So it'll be very interesting on what we see. I mean, their offensive rating in the fourth quarter is 122, which is absolutely insane overall. And they still have a defensive rating of 102, which is very good also. And this team is, I mean, looking at it overall, I said that we both had the same prediction that Denver would win in 6, but Miami going home, if they can keep this tied, or, I mean, even if I think if they go down 3-1, it might be pretty much over at that point. Denver's not going to blow a 3-1 lead. But if they can keep it even going back to Denver, we've seen that the Heat can win in Denver and they can win on the road in these playoffs. So it'll be very interesting to what we see, especially in game 3, because that's a very tall tale game that we'll see.
Yeah, and talking about these important role players, excuse me. I mean, let's talk about Denver's most important role player throughout this whole playoff run. That's been Michael Porter Jr. In the finals, he hasn't looked like himself. I mean, he's shooting 29% from the field during these finals. He's only averaging 9 points. It's just not the Michael Porter Jr. we've seen him this big playoff run. As we know, and as has been discussed in the media quite a bit lately, the team obviously runs for Jokic and Murray. You need to shut down at least one of those guys to have a chance. But what's made Denver so good in the past is we've seen off nights from Jokic and Murray, and guys like Porter Jr. and KCP and Brown. They have willed them to victories. We saw that in forget the game number, one of the games against the Suns. They did that almost on their own. And Michael Porter Jr. is such a hot and cold player. And we've been, Nuggets fans have been blessed to see him be hot this whole playoffs until the finals. And that's going to be a big loss for them. I mean, if anyone's going to bounce back, if anybody believes in shooting out of the slump, it would be Michael Porter Jr. But if he's going to be cold these whole finals, that's when Miami can attack on him because, as we know, he's not this defensive menace. He's not this guy. He's definitely not a playmaker. He's not a guy that affects the game in many ways except for his scoring. So if he's shooting at less than 30% and not putting up good scoring outputs, then he's not going to be a good factor for them. I mean, we saw in game 1, he's a starter in the NBA Finals. He played 43 minutes. Game 2, he's only playing 26 minutes. So it's really, is Michael Malone going to believe in letting Porter shoot through it? Because this isn't the middle of the regular season where you can have a guy figure stuff out. This is the finals. So you need to win every game. So it's going to be interesting to see if Porter Jr., if the team has faith in him to get through the slump that came at the worst possible time.
Yeah. And another interesting stat that I want to point out too, it seems like Miami kind of changed their game plan going into game 2. Jokic is now the only player. There's been 52 players in NBA history to score 40 or more points in three career playoff games, and he's the only player to not see a win in any of those. So it seems like Miami, especially last game, they said, we're going to have the rest of you beat us. And another series that I can remember in the past too, bringing up, I think it was the 2021 Nets and Bucks series. The Bucks said, we know Kevin Durant's going to cook us no matter what. We're going to let him score. We're going to let the rest of the team beat us. And a guy you just pointed out too, Michael Porter Jr., if the Heat are going to let Michael Porter Jr. beat them, he's either going to drop 25 points or he's not going to play very well. Like we know he's not going to pass the ball at all. So he's going to shoot and he's either going to make them or he's not. And the Heat, they have so many role players. They're so deep coming off the bench. But especially if we look at the Nuggets, I mean, it's pretty much, they have the 8-man rotation. They have Bruce Brown, who's good every single game off the bench. But then you have Christian Braun. And I mean, comparing him to guys off the bench, like Miami, they have Duncan Robinson coming off the bench, Kyle Lowry coming off the bench. Depends on who's starting between Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, and then you have Martin coming off the bench too. But there's just shooters coming off of that bench. And Denver has I would say they probably have the better starting lineup. But when you bring all the players overall, Miami's running a 10-man rotation at this point, and they're getting guys in there every single game to go in and score. So if you're going to let Jokic score 40 points, I know at some point, if he scores 40 points, they'll probably win a game. But it seems like if they're going to let him score and have the rest of the team beat you, that might be the best going forward for them.
Yeah, but what I will say about Denver is that the guys that bring off the bench aren't electric scorers, like Miami, but they do much more, I will say. Bruce Brown is not this guy that goes in there and only shoots threes. When he's on the court, he's one of the best individual defenders on the court. He is one of the only guys off any team's bench in this whole playoffs that I would trust to guard Jimmy Butler. And there is something to that. Christian Braun is not a shooter by any means, but he is an athletic freak. And we saw in game 2, he was a big part of getting them back into that game, his defensive efforts. Some stuff that will show up on the stat sheet and some that won't. But I remember vividly a very big steal that was kind of the turning point in Denver's run that put them in control going into the fourth quarter. Obviously, they screwed that up. But these guys do stuff, not even to mention Jeff Green. Jeff Green is a guy that we may have anticipated to be a little bit of a non-factor. And in game 1, he hit the most clutch shot of the game. He was basically what the dagger for Denver looked like in that game 1. So I do want to give some credit to Denver's bench players. To kick it back, just to say some good things about Miami, which I honestly feel like I don't do enough. Gabe Vincent is unbelievable. The fact that this Heat team is relying on Gabe Vincent to be their second highest scorer and it's working is unbelievable to me. I mean, he's shooting 9 from 16 from 3 through this whole series to this point, the first 2 games, but that is unbelievable. That is numbers you don't expect to see from a guy that we might not have known if he was going to start this playoff run with Kyle Lowry being so playoff, he's had so much history in the playoffs. Gabe Vincent comes in and steals the show. It's just absolutely incredible. His playmaking is underrated because he doesn't have a lot of assists in the stat sheet, excuse me, but he's always making great plays. He's a high energy guy, and guys like that, maybe not necessarily the guys that come off their bench, but the very good contributors that Miami has built. They haven't drafted these guys. They haven't, signed these guys in free agency. They've built this team to be playoff contributors, and it's impressive. There's a reason Denver has been so dominant all year and is having so much trouble against this Heat team.
Yeah, and one guy too I want to talk about, Kevin Love didn't even play in game 1 overall, and then he comes in and he starts and he has a higher plus minus, the second highest plus minus on the team, higher than Bam Adebayo, just below Gabe Vincent in game 2. I mean, he only dropped 6 points, but he had 10 rebounds, 2 steals. He was out there offensively and defensively. And that's a guy who didn't even play a minute in game 1. There's just so much that goes into this, both of these teams too. Overall, I mean, this series, it seems like we're in for a good one. I think the worst outcome that we could see is Denver to just dominate the rest of the series, but I don't think that'll happen. I think we'll get a lot of competitive games, especially to end this series. And in Miami, it's going to be very interesting too, because going into the game tonight, as of our recording, if Miami can stay in it, I mean, they lost game 1 by 11. I would say it was definitely probably not an 11-point game throughout the whole game. Denver definitely controlled most of the game, but game 2, they came back in the fourth quarter, and we know how good they can be in the fourth quarter. So it just depends on how they come out and play tonight. And then in game 4 too, even if they lose tonight, as long as it's close, I mean, like we said at the start of this series, Miami's not going to go out there and just play a half-ass game. They're going to go out there and they're going to drop everything every night. And their shooters aren't scared to shoot. And that can either be that'll help them win the game, or if they lose, they know that next game, all their shooters aren't going to have a bad game at once. It seems like there's always going to be at least one guy that's on. So if they can get 2 or 3 of them on, they're going to be very hard to stop.
Yeah, and what I'll add to that, because I think that's great analysis, but I think we're both thinking the same thing here, and we just haven't said it. We're still waiting for the Jimmy Butler game. We've seen Jimmy Butler have tremendous individual outputs this whole playoff run, and we didn't get it in game 1 or game 2. He was kind of disappointing in both. Game 2, obviously, a step in the right direction. They're going to arrest me for these takes, man. But to keep it going, I mean, Jimmy Butler, he hasn't had his big time to shine yet. And as much as I love Denver, Denver's not the team that's going to hold him under the water the whole time. He's going to be able to burst through soon. And as much as I don't really want to talk about it because I don't really know what the deal is with him, Tyler Hero could come back if this goes to 6 or 7. And as much as I am worried that he won't perform well with, an injury on his shooting hands, that's always going to bode not very well for guys. He could be a big contributor. We both know Tyler Hero at his best is a dominant scorer. And when we've been seeing performances from Strus, Martin, Robinson, Hero should be able to go crazy. So it's going to be very fun. I'm expecting in, one of these upcoming games, 3, 4, 5, however far it goes, 6, 7, Jimmy Butler is going to have that signature Jimmy Butler game. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think Denver could beat a Miami team with Jimmy Butler playing at his best. So if we get that for a game, that's an easy way for the Heat to get another one in this very competitive series.
Yeah, and it's a tied series, and Miami won a game coming back in the fourth quarter, and we haven't seen Jimmy Butler at the level that he's at, which is kind of scary, especially, I would say, if you're a Nuggets fan too. But going into these games, I expect Jimmy Butler to have one of those games in game 3 or 4 in Miami. He turns up at home to another notch. Overall, he's great on the road, but when he's backed by the home fans, he is just absolutely incredible overall. And I mean, we're talking about Tyler Hero too. He'll come back and he'll have an impact, but obviously they've played very well without him. And it's whether he plays good or not, they're still going to be in all these games too. Obviously, if he comes back and he can shoot well, it's a completely different story. But Miami has been doing this without him and also without Victor Oladipo, who wouldn't be a huge contributor, but that's still a guy coming off the bench too. So if they had Tyler Hero and Victor Oladipo coming off the bench too, it's just, I mean, we're talking about a team too that's an 8th seed who almost didn't even make the playoffs with 2 key players. Tyler Hero a lot more key, but he hasn't played since the Milwaukee game 3, and it's just insane to kind of see how far the Heat have come without both of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the, I guess, on paper, least talented teams to ever make a finals run like this, but that's just what makes it even more impressive. They don't have, I look at a team like Boston or a team like Philly, our 2 favorite teams. They have much more talent on the roster over there. They're not starting guys like Max Strus or, Gabe Vincent. But the problem is Max Strus and Gabe Vincent have been 2 of the Heat's best players this whole run. They have these guys that aren't regular season, studs, guys that honestly in the regular season wouldn't have started on a lot of teams in the league, but they're just on another notch in the playoffs. So as we mentioned both back and forth, and as I'll just say again, when Jimmy Butler shows up and drops a 40-point game or, a double-double with 30 points, 15 rebounds, something to that extent where we know Jimmy Butler can do, it's really scary. And this Denver team needs to get back on their saddle. They need to dominate like they have in the past because Denver can't skate by this Heat team. Denver could afford to skate by a team like Minnesota. They even found out a way to skate by Phoenix with some of the injuries Phoenix had. But they need to go out here and dominate like we know they can if they want to beat this Miami team. Because if they mess around, lose a game in Miami, lose another game at home, they're not winning the series. It's not going to happen. So do I think Denver will do it? Absolutely. I think they'll figure it out. I think it's a 1-1 series. It's not like their backs are against the wall. I think they'll just go out and play their brand of basketball and win. But I mean, they need to go out and do it. You can't afford to take a loss tonight if you're Denver, especially in Miami, because if you're down 2-1 with another game in Miami for game 4, I don't know, man. I think those Heat bettors might be happy.
Yeah, and I think even if Miami goes up, I don't think they're going to blow a lead. Maybe they'll let them get one, but they won't let them get them all. So
Yeah.
in the end, also another thing, just kind of thinking about it too, going back to that Victor Oladipo and Tyler Hero point, like they're running a 10-man rotation without those 2 players. And when we look at teams too, like we look at the Nuggets and they're running an 8-man rotation. And it just seems like it's just crazy how much depth this Heat team has. And they really have, I mean, you have Bam Adebayo, who borderline star player. That might be a hot take. I know there's a lot of people that love Bam Adebayo, but I mean, obviously Jimmy Butler is who he is. But besides that, you look at the rest of the roster, like you look at Kevin Love playing 22 minutes a game. And if you told me that 3 years ago, I'd say, oh, he's probably retired by now at this point, where he's playing for Charlotte, who gave him $20 million a year for some reason. But it's just insane to look at the difference between these 2 teams. And now that it's a tied series going into this, I think Miami will come out with at least one of the games. But like you said, if they go up 3-1 coming out of Miami, which I don't think is that unrealistic, I'm never going to count Jimmy Butler out, especially in Miami. So if Denver can go up 3-1, I think it's probably wraps on this series by the time we talk next. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's 2-2. I think that's probably, if I had to make a prediction, that's probably where we'd be at. So, I mean, from a week's time, we'll probably be talking about game 4, game 5. I don't know the exact schedule, but I'm guessing it's a lot like last time. So I guess my official prediction going into next week, I think it'll be knotted at 2-2.
Yeah. I can see something like that. I agree. I think Miami will catch one at home, but if you want my official prediction, I would say it's 2-2 after this Miami stretch, and then Denver gets the next 2. I'll stick with the Nuggets in 6. It's just, again, and I hate doing this because we say this every time we talk about Miami and every time we predicted them to lose and we're wrong. But I think at some point you just got to take the talent. And this is not a series where I think, Miami can win based off being much better coached like they have in the past. They did it against Missoula. They did it against Thibodeau, all that. Even Budenholzer in the first round, Spo was a better coach. But Michael Malone's about as good as Spo is. They're both probably the 2 best coaches in the game if I had to pick 2. So this is a series where the players are just going to play because they're not going to win a game just based on coaching matchups at the end of the day. Those help, but at the end of the day, it's on the players to go get a W. And I think Denver just has guys that are more likely to do it. But I don't know if we leave Miami 2-2. I hate counting out the Heat because it makes me look stupid every time. So it's gonna be fun. I would agree with your prediction, but I still got to keep the Nuggets in 6.
Yep. And well, with that being said, we'll see you guys in a week. So we'll see what happens by then. I don't think we'll have a champion by then, but you never know. Maybe we'll see the NBA throw something in the script out.
All right, fair enough. I'll see you guys next week.